For 15 days, I didn't hear a single word from my sister. No calls, no texts, no updates from anyone in town. At first, I blamed it on spotty reception, then on her stubbornness. Lana always had that independent streak, the kind that could make you proud and furious at the same time. But by day 10, the excuses stopped working. Something was wrong. I was still on active duty when I got the call from my neighbor back home in Ashburn, Nevada. Mrs. Lowell sounded nervous, which was strange for a woman who once shooed off a bear from her trash cans with a broom. "Annie," she said, "I haven't seen your sister in over a week. Her mail's piling up, her car's still in the driveway, and there's this smell." That word smell hit harder than a rifle shot. Within hours, I had my emergency leave approved. My CO didn't ask many questions, and I didn't offer details. Soldiers don't need reasons to go home when family's involved. I threw my duffel bag in the back of my Jeep, grabbed a gas station coffee that tasted like melted rubber, and started the 6-hour drive north. Ashburn wasn't much to look at. A few blocks of old houses, one gas station, a diner that still played music from the 80 seconds, and miles of dry desert beyond that. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, which made silence all the more terrifying. When I pulled into Lana's street, everything looked the same except the air felt heavy, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Her front door was cracked open. I froze. My training kicked in before my emotions did. I turned off the ignition, stepped out slowly, and scanned the area. The porch light was still on, flickering slightly, and there was a pile of unopened mail by the mat. The flower beds she used to fuss over were now just dirt and weeds. Inside, the air hit me first stale, warm, and thick. The kind of air that said something had gone very wrong. The living room was a mess. Couch overturned, cushions slashed, papers scattered across the floor. A photo frame lay face down near the window, glass shattered. I picked it up carefully. It was a picture of Lana with her son Connor from last Christmas. He was 7. Miss Domak sank. The house was silent except for a faint ticking sound, the old wall clock she'd kept since college. I called out, "Lana?" Nothing. I tried again, louder this time. "Connor?" Still nothing. I moved through each room like clearing a house overseas, controlled, methodical, heart pounding in my throat. The kitchen was worse. Drawers half open, fridge door ajar, plates smashed in the sink. A chair lay on its side, one leg splintered. There was a dark stain on the tile near the counter. Not enough to panic over, but enough to make my mind spiral. Then, from the hallway, I heard something. It was faint, a low, uneven sound. Breathing. I froze, hand instinctively moving toward my sidearm before realizing I'd left it locked in the car. I moved closer, the sound leading me to Lana's bedroom. The door was half open, and the room beyond it looked like a hurricane had passed through. Sheets torn, lamp broken, dresser drawers dumped onto the floor. And then came a soft whimper. It was coming from the closet. I approached slowly, every muscle in my body tense. "Hello?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's Anne. I'm not gonna hurt you." The only answer was a shaky inhale, then silence. I took a deep breath and opened the closet door. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw a small figure crouched in the corner behind a pile of clothes. Connor. He was pale, filthy, and trembling. His eyes darted toward me, wide and unfocused, like a wild animal. I knelt down slowly, hands visible, the way you'd approach someone in shock. "Connor," I whispered. "It's me, Aunt Anne. You're okay now." He didn't move. For a second, I thought he didn't even recognize me. Then he blinked and made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. I reached forward carefully, but when my fingers brushed his arm, he flinched hard. His skin was ice cold. "Hey," I said softly. "You're safe now. No one's gonna hurt you." He shook his head. Mom told me to hide," he said, his voice breaking. That single sentence felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I pulled him out gently, wrapping him in the jacket I was wearing. His body was so light it scared me. He must have been hiding in there for days. He clutched his old stuffed bear to his chest, the same one Lana had bought him at the county fair 2 years ago. "Where's your mom?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just buried his face against me and whispered, "Don't let him come back." That was enough for me to know this wasn't some random robbery. I carried him out to the Jeep and drove straight to the nearest hospital. On the way, he didn't say a word. He just kept looking out the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass, eyes hollow. At the ER, doctors rushed him inside, and I finally exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. When one of the nurses asked what happened, I told her the truth. I don't know yet. While they treated him, I sat in the hallway under buzzing fluorescent lights, replaying everything in my head: the broken furniture, the stains, the silence, and that smell Mrs. Lowell had mentioned it hadn't been the smell of death. It was something else. Something chemical. Maybe cleaning products. Maybe something used to cover something up. After what felt like forever, a doctor came out. "He's stable," she said. "Dehydrated, hungry, but no major injuries. He's been through serious psychological trauma, though. You said he was alone for days? 3, maybe 4, I said. He didn't say much. She nodded grimly. "We'll keep him overnight, but you should call the police." I already had. 2 officers showed up about 20 minutes later, Detective Merritt and a younger partner who looked like he'd just learned how to shave. Merritt had that seasoned calm I'd seen in senior officers. Steady eyes, slow breathing, voice that didn't waste words. He listened as I told him everything from the call that made me drive up to finding Connor in the closet. He didn't interrupt, just nodded once in a while, jotting things down in a worn notebook. When I finished, he asked, "You sure you didn't touch much in the house?" "Just the door handles in the closet," I said. "Good. We'll treat it as an active crime scene." End quote. He paused, studying me. "You're military?" "Lieutenant," I said. "Army." He gave a short nod. "Then you already know the drill. Don't jump ahead of us. We'll find out what happened." I wanted to believe him, but I'd seen too much to trust easy reassurances. When I stepped outside the hospital, the night air felt colder than the desert had any right to be. The neon lights from the diner across the street flickered on and off, like the world itself couldn't decide if it was still awake. I looked back through the glass at Connor sleeping in that hospital bed, his small hand still gripping that bear, and something in me hardened. I didn't know what had happened to my sister yet. But I knew this. I wasn't going back to base until I found out. And I wasn't letting anyone get away with it. The next morning, the sun barely made it through the blinds of that hospital room. Connor was awake, staring at the ceiling like he was somewhere else entirely. When I walked in, he didn't flinch this time, just followed me with his eyes. The nurse said he hadn't said a word since I left, not even when they offered him breakfast. The tray was untouched except for the chocolate milk. Kids always go for the chocolate milk. I pulled a chair next to his bed and sat down. "Hey, champ," I said quietly. "You did good last night. You're safe now." He didn't reply, but his fingers fidgeted with the edge of the blanket. He looked smaller than I remembered, like the fear had shrunk him somehow. I wanted to ask him 100 questions, but the detective walked in before I could start. Detective Merritt looked like he hadn't slept either. He gave me a nod. "Morning, Lieutenant. We've got a team at your sister's house. You might want to come with us when you can." "I'm coming," I said. He looked at Connor. "The kid's staying here for now. We'll have someone from Child Services check on him until family arrangements are made." "I'm family," I said, sharper than I meant to. He raised a brow, like he expected that. "Then you'll be the one signing custody paperwork later," he said calmly. "But for now, let the doctors handle him. You and I have a scene to visit." I leaned close to Connor before leaving. "I'll be back soon, okay? You're safe here." He turned his head slightly, eyes glassy, voice barely a whisper. "Don't go to the house." That stopped me cold. "Why not?" He shook his head and hid under the blanket. "He'll come back." I didn't push him. I just tucked the blanket around him and left. But the words stuck to my brain like static. The drive back to the house was quiet, except for the hum of Merritt's radio. He kept his eyes on the road, one hand on the steering wheel. "You said your sister was a single mom?" "Yeah," I said. "Divorced. The dad's not in the picture." He gave a short nod. "She had anyone else in her life recently? Boyfriend, business partner, anything?" I shook my head. "Not that I know of. We weren't in touch as much lately." He looked over briefly. "Military distance?" I gave a humorless laugh. "You could say that." When we pulled up to the house, the whole street looked different. Police tape across the yard, 2 squad cars parked outside, a van from forensics unloading gear. Neighbors stood behind fences pretending not to stare. I stepped out and inhaled the dry morning air. The smell that had hung in the house last night was gone, or maybe I was just too focused to notice it now. Inside, the place looked worse in daylight. Every detail screamed chaos. The forensics team moved carefully, snapping photos, dusting surfaces. Merritt walked me through it step by step. Signs of a struggle in the living room, he said. Broken glass, overturned furniture. We found partial prints on the doorknob, and the counter looks like at least 2 sets. Door? He nodded. One likely belongs to your sister, the other's unidentified so far. In the kitchen, one of the techs crouched near the floor, swabbing something. Possible blood trace, she said without looking up. Merritt scribbled that down. I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You think it's a robbery? He shook his head. No forced entry. Whoever did this, they were either let in or had a key. That sentence felt like a punch to the gut. I stared at the broken chair, the one I'd noticed last night. Lana used to joke that she could handle anything life threw at her, but this didn't look like she'd had a chance. A younger officer walked up, holding a small evidence bag. Detective, found this behind the couch. Inside the bag was a torn envelope with a few crumpled bills still inside. Merritt frowned. Looks like cash. Not much. Maybe $50. I noticed something else, a faint, smeared note on the back of the envelope. That's my sister's handwriting, I said, pointing at the edge. The ink was half faded, but I could make out 2 words. Don't trust. The rest was gone. Merritt looked up at me. Don't trust who? If I knew that, I said, we wouldn't be standing here. He pocketed the evidence bag and turned to another officer. Check bank statements. See if she had any withdrawals recently. Credit card, store accounts, anything that shows unusual activity. While the team worked, I walked down the hall toward Lana's bedroom. The closet door was still open, the faint outline of where Connor had crouched visible on the carpet. The stuffed bear wasn't there anymore. The hospital must have let him keep it. I crouched and noticed something shiny behind the stack of boxes in the corner. I pulled it out, a small silver necklace with a charm shaped like a compass. I recognized it instantly. It was my gift to Lana when I first deployed. She'd said, "So you'll always find your way back." I handed it to Merritt quietly. He examined it for a second, then slipped it into another evidence bag. You and your sister close growing up? Close enough to fight about everything, I said. But yeah, she looked up to me. I guess I didn't do much to deserve that lately. He didn't respond. He didn't have to. By the time we left, it was close to noon. The sun was brutal, and the smell of dust and old paint clung to my clothes. Merritt stopped by his car. We'll run prints, check surveillance, talk to the neighbors again. You should get some rest. Rest isn't going to help, I said. Then at least eat something. Soldiers forget that's important too. He gave me his card and told me he'd call once they had results. I watched the forensics van pull away before heading back to the hospital. Connor was awake again when I got there, sitting cross-legged on the bed with a coloring book someone had brought him. He looked up when I walked in but didn't smile. Did you go there? He asked. Yeah. His lip trembled. Was she there? I hesitated. Nobody. Not yet. He stared down at the page, gripping the crayon tighter. The man said she'd be okay. What man? He didn't look up. The man who came that night. Mom said to hide, and then they shouted. He was mad. He broke things. My pulse quickened. Did you see him? He nodded slowly. He wore a black jacket. He smelled like gas. Gasoline? Yeah. He sniffled. He took Mom's phone. Then it got quiet. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Do you remember what he looked like? Anything at all? Connor bit his lip. He had a scar here. He pointed to his chin. And he said something about money. He said she owed him. That was enough for me to know we weren't dealing with a random intruder. Merritt would want every word of this. I called him from the hallway and gave a quick rundown. He didn't interrupt, just said, "We'll run it through our records. Sounds like a debt collector or loan shark." When I hung up, I glanced back into the room. Connor had started coloring again, pressing too hard on the crayon until it snapped. He didn't seem to notice. I walked over, crouched beside the bed, and picked up the broken piece. "Hey," I said, You're not alone anymore, okay? He didn't answer, but he leaned into me just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Outside, the late afternoon light stretched long across the parking lot. I stood by the window watching people come and go, the world moving on like nothing had happened. Somewhere out there, someone knew exactly what happened to Lana. Someone thought they'd get away with it. I'd seen men like that before overseas, in alleys and markets, men who hid behind excuses and left others bleeding for it. And if this was the same kind of man, he'd learn the same lessons soon enough. The next day started with the kind of cold wind that made the whole town feel half asleep. I was sitting in the back of the precinct, coffee gone lukewarm, watching Detective Merritt pin photos of my sister's house onto a board. Crime scene prints, the blood sample, the torn envelope with Lana's handwriting all laid out like pieces of a puzzle no one wanted to finish. Bank records came back, Merritt said, flipping through a folder. Your sister withdrew close to $6,000 2 weeks ago. Cash. No trace after that. She didn't keep that kind of money lying around, I said. She ran a bookkeeping service from home. That's not exactly rolls of cash work. Merritt nodded, which means she was paying someone, or trying to. He handed me a photo. It showed a black SUV parked near her street the night before she went missing, caught by a neighbor's security camera. The image was grainy, but I could make out a decal on the back window, a white falcon silhouette. You ever seen that before? He asked. I shook my head. No, but Connor mentioned a man with a scar on his chin. Smelled like gas. Maybe that's our guy. Merritt grunted in agreement. We'll run the vehicle through DMV and cross-check loan shark activity in the area. I leaned forward. Loan shark? You think my sister was mixed up in that? He hesitated before answering. We found a burner phone in her nightstand. Texts between her and someone named Reed. No last name, no profile picture, just a bunch of messages asking for more time to fix it. The word fix hit like a slap. Lana always said that whenever she was trying to keep a secret. Don't worry, I'll fix it. What kind of messages? I asked. He slid the printouts across the table. The last few texts were short, frantic. Lana, please. I just need a few days. Reed, you had your chance. You know how this works. Lana, don't come here. My son's home. Reed, that's your problem. Merritt looked up. We've traced that number to a prepaid SIM, bought at a gas station off Highway 50. I rubbed my temples. So she was in trouble, and no one knew. End quote. He gave me a look that wasn't judgmental, but it stung anyway. You were overseas? Training command in Fort Lewis, I said quietly. She didn't tell me anything. Maybe she didn't want me to worry. Merritt nodded slowly, like he'd seen the same thing before, families hiding their mess until it exploded. A young officer poked his head in. Detective, you'll want to see this. Action. We followed him down the hall to the evidence room, where a tech was examining a set of fingerprints lifted from the kitchen counter. We got a partial match, the tech said, zooming in on the screen. Belongs to a guy named Reed Collins. Local contractor, but also a known associate of a small-time loan operation. Multiple priors for extortion and aggravated assault. Merritt looked at me. Sound familiar? No, I said. But I'd like to meet him. Not yet, he said firmly. We'll find him, but you stay out of it. Let us handle it. I didn't argue, but he could tell I wasn't promising anything. By noon, I was back at Lana's house. The police tape still fluttered in the wind, but the scene was cleared for family entry. The air inside had lost that smell of panic, replaced by something emptier, quiet abandonment. I started picking up the mess, not to clean, but to understand. The table by the window had her planner, still open to the week she disappeared. Her neat handwriting listed ordinary things. Pick up Connor's prescription. Call water company. Meet RC. 6 p.m. Confirm payment. There it was again. RC. I pulled out my phone and searched Reed Collins Ashburn NV. The first hit was a listing for Collins Home Improvement, a remodeling business with a dozen bad reviews and a photo of a man who looked like he could win an argument with a bulldozer. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And yes, there was a faint scar on his chin. The caption below the photo read, Owner and contractor established 2016. I scrolled further. 2 years ago, he'd been sued for unpaid work and property damage. The case was dismissed after a private settlement. Typical. I saved the image. When I closed Lana's planner, an envelope fell out from the back cover. It was sealed with tape, labeled only, "In case something happens." My throat went dry. I peeled it open carefully. Inside was a short handwritten note, dated just a week before she vanished. "Anne, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't fix it. I tried to protect Connor. Please don't judge me for what I did. Reed said he'd hurt us if I didn't pay. He wants everything. The store money, the house. I can't let that happen. Take care of Connor. I love you. Lana." The handwriting trembled in places, like she'd been writing fast or afraid someone might walk in. I read it twice, then folded it back, my fingers shaking. I wasn't sure if I was angrier at her for keeping it secret or at myself for not seeing it sooner. I called Merritt immediately and read the note to him. He didn't sound surprised. "That confirms it," he said. "Reed Collins isn't just a suspect. He's the key. We're getting a warrant for his business records and home address. We'll find him." I hung up and looked around the house again. Every detail suddenly made sense: the broken furniture, the scattered papers, the missing phone. It wasn't random. It was desperation. She'd fought back. I sat on the edge of her bed, running my hand along the dresser, and my fingers brushed against something taped underneath the drawer. It was a small USB drive. I pulled it off and plugged it into my laptop. There was only one folder: tax files, 2024. But inside were scanned documents that didn't belong to her business. Fake invoices, wire transfers, large cash deposits, all tied to Collins' home improvement. She'd been keeping records, evidence. My chest tightened. Lana hadn't been just a victim. She'd been trying to expose him. I printed copies of everything and drove straight to the station. Merritt met me at the front desk, his expression unreadable. I handed him the folder. She was documenting him. Money laundering, fake clients, offshore payments, everything. Aggression. He flipped through the pages quickly, eyes narrowing. Jesus. She was sitting on a financial bomb. "Yeah," I said. "And he found out." Merritt nodded grimly. "We'll bring in Collins by tonight. He's not getting far." But even as he said it, I could tell he wasn't sure. Guys like Collins didn't just disappear, they prepared. When I walked out of the precinct, the sky had started to turn orange over the desert. The air smelled like heat and metal, and I caught my reflection in the glass doors, tired, tense, but determined. I wasn't thinking about regulations or what I was allowed to do. I was thinking about my sister, writing that letter with shaking hands, probably believing no one would come for her. That wasn't going to happen again. I got in my car, started the engine, and stared down the road that led out of town. If Collins thought he could scare my family into silence, he'd underestimated the wrong damn sister. By the time the sun slipped behind the ridge, I was parked outside a place called Collins Home Improvement. It wasn't much of a business: a rusted sign, a gravel lot, and a prefab office that looked abandoned. A single pickup sat out front, dust coating the windshield, a half-empty coffee cup still in the holder. Merritt had told me to wait for backup if I ever saw Collins, but waiting had never been one of my strengths. I stepped out, walked up to the door, and tried the handle. Locked. I circled around the side, peered through a grimy window, and saw a mess of papers scattered on a desk. The monitor was still on, its glow faint against the dusty blinds. Someone had left in a hurry. I didn't need to break in to know it. The tire tracks leading away from the lot told the story. 2 sets of them. One belonged to the pickup. The other was newer, from a larger vehicle, maybe a van. They led toward the old industrial park on the edge of town. Merritt's voice echoed in my head. "Let us handle it." I ignored it. I followed the trail until it disappeared into a line of storage units by the freight yard. No lights, no security cameras, just the hum of the wind through the metal siding. I scanned each door until I found one with a fresh scrape near the latch. Someone had forced it open recently. I crouched, peered inside, and caught the faint scent of gasoline again. Inside were boxes of paint cans, tool kits, and shoved in the corner a safe, its door ajar. I turned on my phone flashlight and stepped closer. Inside the safe was a neat pile of cash, maybe 10 grand, and a notebook labeled Ledger. I flipped it open. Page after page listed names, dates, and dollar amounts. It wasn't home repairs, it was extortion. Loans with interest rates that could make a mobster blush. One name jumped off the page. L. Pierce. 12 kelvins outstanding, due immediately. My sister had been in debt to this man, but more than that, her name was circled in red ink, and under it, in a rushed scrawl, were the words, "Too risky. Problem." I heard a noise behind me, gravel crunching. I killed the light and stepped aside, pressing myself against the cold metal wall. The storage door creaked open, and two figures stepped in. One was tall, heavy-set, the other smaller, twitchier. The taller man flicked on a flashlight. "You sure he left it here?" The smaller one whispered. "Yeah. He said he'd drop the files and burn the place tomorrow. We grabbed the ledger tonight. It's done." I stayed still, slow breathing, heart steady. They moved toward the safe, the taller one cursing under his breath when he saw it open. Shit. Someone's been here. That was my cue to leave. I slipped out the side door, keeping low, but my boot hit a loose wrench. The clank echoed. Both flashlights swung toward me. "Hey, who's there?" I didn't stick around to explain. I ran. Their footsteps pounded behind me, one yelling, "Stop! You don't want to make this worse," which was usually what people said right before making it worse. I cut between the storage rows and ducked behind a shipping container, forcing my breathing to slow. The footsteps stopped, and a voice said, "Forget it. Grab the book, we'll deal with her later." Her? They knew who I was. By the time I made it back to my car, my hands were shaking not from fear, but fury. I called Merritt, and he picked up on the second ring. "Detective, I found something," I said, my voice tight. "A ledger. Storage unit near the freight yard. Collins's operation. 2 men showed up while I was there." "You went alone?" His voice sharpened. "I'm not great with patience," he sighed. "You could have been killed. Stay put. We'll send a unit." "I'm already gone," I said. "And I've got photos." "And?" I hung up before he could finish. At home, I spread out the pictures across the kitchen table. The ledger pages, the cash, the list of names. It was bigger than I thought. This wasn't just about one loan or one family, this was a full-blown laundering ring. Collins was fronting construction jobs to funnel dirty money through fake invoices, and Lana had stumbled right into it. She'd been their accountant, probably unknowingly at first, until she realized what they were doing. The tax files on her drive weren't hers, they were evidence. And when she threatened to expose them, they turned on her. I poured myself a glass of water and realized my hands were still trembling. The part of me trained to assess threat scenarios kicked in. Motive, pattern, resources. Collins had both money and muscle. He wasn't working alone. And if 2 of his guys already knew who I was, that meant I didn't have long before they came looking. The knock at my door that night didn't help. I froze mid-step. Another knock. Louder this time. "Miss Pierce?" a voice called. "Detective Merritt." I cracked the door open an inch. It was him, tie loose, expression worn, eyes sharper than usual. "You left out a few details in your call," he said dryly. "You want to tell me why my team found a half-open crime scene with fresh footprints?" "Because waiting gets people killed," I said. He exhaled through his nose, clearly fighting the urge to argue. "You're lucky those men didn't see your face. We pulled camera footage from a nearby gas station, they're Collins's guys. Both have records. Names? Jack Vargo and Luis Carver. Muscle for hire, Collins used them before." I leaned against the counter. "So what's next?" "Next," Merritt said, "we issue a warrant for Collins's arrest and lock down every property he owns. If your sister's alive, he's our best shot at finding her." He hesitated, then added, "You need to stay out of this. You're too close." I laughed, bitter. Detective, she was my sister. Too close stopped mattering the moment I found her kid hiding in a closet. He studied me for a second, then nodded. "Then do me one favor. If you find something before we do, you call me first. No cowboy moves." "Can't promise that," I said. He half smiled. "Didn't think you would." After he left, I sat back down at the table. The ledger stared back at me like a silent accusation. I picked up the photo of Lana and Connor from the shattered frame. She looked happy, genuinely happy, the way people do right before everything falls apart. There was still one thing missing, proof that Collins had gone after her personally. The ledger showed money, the texts showed threats. But I needed a connection, a location, a date, something that tied him directly to that night. I opened her laptop again and dug deeper. Hidden in her email drafts was an unsent message, timestamped 11:42 p.m., the night she disappeared. Tow. Detective Im at Ashburn PD Go. Subject: Urgent. Collins Records. Message: Detective, I have everything. He found out I copied the files. If something happens to me, check the cabin by Mill Creek. That's where they meet. Please hurry. The cursor blinked at the end of the last sentence, frozen mid-word. She'd been interrupted before she could hit send. I stared at the screen, the hum of the fridge suddenly deafening. Mill Creek, 10 miles north of town. I grabbed my keys, shoved the printed copy of the email into my pocket, and headed for the door. If Collins had been there once, maybe he still was. And if he wasn't, there'd be something, tracks, evidence, anything that could tell me what really happened that night. The drive was dark and quiet, the desert stretching out endlessly on either side of the road. My headlights cut through the dust, catching nothing but shadows and scrub. When I finally turned off onto the dirt path that led toward the creek, I killed the engine and listened. Crickets, wind, and somewhere in the distance a faint metallic clatter. I reached for my flashlight, took a breath, and started walking toward the sound. The closer I got to Mill Creek, the colder the air felt. The road turned from dirt to mud, the tires slipping in patches where the rain had hit days earlier. I parked beneath a cluster of pine trees and killed the engine. The place was quiet, too quiet for somewhere that was supposed to be a meeting spot. Just the sound of the wind brushing through the branches and the soft rush of water in the distance. The cabin wasn't hard to find. It sat low against the slope, a small wooden structure with peeling paint, and a porch that sagged like it had given up trying to stand straight. The front door was locked, but the lock was new, shiny, cheap, and recently installed. I stepped around the back, found a cracked window, and pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The smell hit first. Mold, stale smoke, and something chemical, bleach maybe. Inside, the place looked abandoned. One table, 2 chairs, a metal filing cabinet, and an ashtray full of cigarette butts. On the table sat a single object, a mug half full of coffee, still warm. Someone had been here. I froze, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the soft drip of water from a leaky pipe. I took a step closer to the table and noticed a few sheets of paper beside the mug. They were damp, edges curled, ink smudged. The top page was a printout of a bank transfer. Collins' home improvement to an account under a fake name, the same offshore account Lana had documented. Another page was handwritten, the same messy scrawl I recognized from her planner. I held it up to the light. Anne, if you ever find this place, it means he knows. I didn't have time to finish what I started. The files, the ledger, everything he used to hide money, they're here. Please don't come after him. Take Connor and leave. I know you won't, but I have to say it anyway. L. My throat tightened. Even in a note meant for the worst-case scenario, she'd still known exactly how I'd react. I know you won't. She was right. The floor creaked behind me. I spun around. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light, tall, heavy-set, hands raised slightly. He looked about 40, maybe 50, wearing a work jacket streaked with grease. His face was rough, his chin marked with a thin white scar. Lieutenant Pierce, he said calmly. You shouldn't be here. Collins, I said, voice flat. You've got a lot of nerve showing up. He smirked. Funny. I could say the same thing. You break into private property, go through my stuff. That's not exactly by the book for a soldier, is it? This isn't about rules, I said. It's about what you did to my sister. He took a step forward, slow, deliberate. Your sister made a mistake. She got involved in something she didn't understand. I tried to help her, told her to walk away. She didn't listen. I clenched my fists. You mean she didn't pay you fast enough? His eyes hardened. She stole from me. That's a lie. She took the files, he snapped. Do you have any idea what that put me in? The people I work with don't like mistakes. She panicked, and now look where we are. So you killed her. He shook his head almost casually. If I wanted her dead, you'd have found a body by now. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Not if she's dead. but if I wanted her dead. Intentional, precise. I took a step closer. Where is she? Collins tilted his head slightly, that smug smile never fading. You're asking the wrong questions. You should be asking yourself why she didn't tell you anything. Maybe she knew what you'd do. He turned to leave, but I moved faster. I grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the doorframe. Where is she? His hand shot up, gripping my wrist hard enough to bruise. Let go, he said through his teeth. You don't scare me. I leaned in. That's your first mistake. For a moment, we stood locked in that standoff, the kind that could go bad fast. Then headlights flashed outside. Collins shoved me back, straightened his jacket, and walked out into the open. I followed, staying just behind him. A dark sedan had pulled up. 2 men stepped out, the same ones I'd seen at the storage unit, Vargo and Carver. Collins waved them off with a flick of his hand. It's fine, she's leaving. Like hell I am, I said. Merritt's voice cut through the night from behind me. Actually, yes, you are. He stepped into view, flashlight in hand. 2 uniformed officers behind him. Collins froze, his smirk fading. Merritt, I said, not taking my eyes off Collins. You're late. Story of my life, he said. Collins, you're under arrest for obstruction, extortion, and suspicion of kidnapping. Hands where I can see them. I do. Collins looked annoyed more than scared. You got no proof of anything. Oh, we've got plenty, Merritt said. Between the ledger, the offshore accounts, and your text threatening a single mother, I'd say you're not walking out of here tonight. Vargo took a step forward, but the younger officer raised his weapon. Don't. For a second, the air hung heavy. Then Collins smiled again, slow, deliberate. You boys think you've got this under control, he said, but you have no idea who you're actually dealing with. Merritt cuffed him without a word. As they led him toward the car, Collins turned his head and looked at me. You think she was innocent? He said quietly. But you didn't know your sister like I did. The words stuck to me like oil. I wanted to ask what he meant, but Merritt nudged me toward his car. Let it go, he said. We'll get more out of him at the station. UF. Back at headquarters, Collins sat in an interrogation room, smug and silent. Through the glass, I watched Merritt and another detective question him. He didn't deny the money or the threats, he just kept circling back to the same phrase. She wasn't who you think she was. Merritt came out an hour later, rubbing the back of his neck. He's not talking about her disappearance. Keeps saying she ran, like she took something and left. I frowned. He's lying. Maybe, Merritt said. But maybe not entirely. We ran her bank logs. She made a transfer 2 days before she vanished $10,000 into an account under the name W. Palmer. We're still tracing it. W. Palmer? I repeated. Never heard of him. Maybe someone helping her, he said. Maybe someone helping him. Either way, she didn't tell you everything. He looked at me carefully, like he was measuring how much to say. You sure you want to keep digging, Lieutenant? Sometimes the truth isn't the comfort you think it'll be. I stared through the glass at Collins, still sitting there like he owned the place, smirk fixed in place. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. When I got home that night, I sat in Lana's old room. The same photo of her and Connor was still on the dresser, now taped back together from where it had cracked. I stared at it for a long time before pulling the note from Mill Creek out of my pocket again. She'd written, "Please don't come after him." She knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. But she'd also left me everything I needed to finish what she started. And I wasn't about to stop halfway. The next morning, the station smelled like burnt coffee and frustration. Merritt was pacing in front of the whiteboard, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders at someone on the other end. I leaned against the doorframe, watching through the glass. Collins had been transferred to county lockup overnight, but his smug expression hadn't faded. The man looked like someone who thought jail was just another meeting he could postpone. When Merritt finally hung up, he sighed and rubbed his temples. The bastard's lawyer is already filing motions. He's got friends with deep pockets. Of course he does, I said. People like him don't do business alone. He glanced at me. We're tracing that W. Palmer account. Might take a few days. In the meantime, there's one more thing. We pulled the GPS data from your sister's car. Last signal came from a wooded area past Mill Creek. It's private land, technically owned by one of Collins's shell companies. So we're going there. he confirmed. But you're riding with me this time. I didn't argue. The drive took less than an hour, but the last few miles were rough, narrow dirt roads lined with pines. No cell reception, just the low hum of the tires over gravel. The kind of place where sound didn't travel and secrets didn't echo back. The car rolled to a stop near a small clearing. Ahead, through the trees, was a narrow cabin smaller than the one at Mill Creek, darker, almost camouflaged against the forest. No signs of life, but the air had that heavy stillness that told you something had happened there. Merritt stepped out first, flashlight ready. "Stay close," he said. "Wasn't planning a picnic." We approached the front door, which was shut but not locked. Inside, the smell was faint but distinct decay mixed with bleach, a contradiction that turned my stomach. The living room was empty, except for a single armchair and a stack of cardboard boxes. Dust covered everything except the floor, where someone had recently walked. "Fresh prints," Merritt muttered, crouching to look. "Small boot size. Maybe a woman's." I felt my chest tighten. "You think it's hers?" "Could be," he said. "Or someone else who wanted us to think that." He moved toward the back room while I checked the boxes. They were full of old receipts, random junk, and a few photographs. Most were of construction sites, men in hard hats, and trucks with the Collins Company logo. But one photo made my blood run cold. Lana, standing next to one of the trucks, smiling for the camera. She looked uncomfortable, like the smile was forced. Behind her, barely visible, was Collins. I turned the photo over. On the back, in her handwriting, was a single date, March 12, the day before she disappeared. "Detective," I called. Merritt came over, looked at the picture, and exhaled. "She was here. That confirms it." The back room looked like it had been cleared out in a hurry. Shelves empty, papers torn, a broken phone on the floor. Merritt lifted the mattress from the small cot in the corner and found a stain on the wood beneath, faint, circular, dark brown. He looked at me, expression unreadable. "We'll test it. Could be blood, could be something else." Now, I stared at it too long and something in me slipped. Not panic, but that creeping hum that starts at the back of your skull and spreads until it takes over your breathing. I'd felt it before in combat. In chaos, the way the mind fractures between focus and fear. The room tilted slightly. Merritt's voice sounded distant. "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just give me a second." I stepped outside, bracing against the cool air, focusing on the sound of the wind. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the same rhythm my therapist had drilled into me after the last deployment. Focus on what's real. Ground yourself. A soft sound broke the rhythm, the faint crunch of leaves behind the cabin. I turned, scanning the tree line. A shadow moved between the trees. "Detective," I called quietly. "We've got company." Merritt was beside me in seconds, hand on his weapon. The shadow shifted again, smaller than an adult, quick. Not running, but watching. "Connor?" I said before I could stop myself. Merritt shot me a look. "The kid's in protective custody." I stepped forward anyway, slowly. The figure darted away, deeper into the trees. Merritt swore under his breath. "Damn it. Stay here." Like hell. We followed, careful, silent. The path curved down toward the creek, where the trees thinned out. When we reached the bottom, the figure was gone, but there, by the water, something caught the light. A small silver chain. A charm shaped like a compass. I crouched, picking it up. It wasn't mine, the design was newer, thinner. Merritt looked around, scanning the area. "Could be Lana's," he said quietly. "Or someone who wanted to make it look that way." My voice came out tight. "She wore one like this when we were kids. Said it meant she'd always find her way back." He exhaled slowly. "Maybe she still will." We walked further along the bank, the mud soft beneath our boots. Something about the pattern of the footprints ahead caught my eye, two sets. One smaller than the other, both leading toward the water then disappearing. Merritt crouched beside them. Adult female, and someone else size 8, maybe 9. Recent, within 48 hours. He glanced at me. "If she's alive, she's been moving around here." I nodded, but part of me wasn't convinced. The logical part said it was possible. The soldier in me, the one who'd seen too much, knew how often possible turned into denial. We followed the creek a bit longer until we found an old fire pit surrounded by beer cans and a tarp. Someone had been camping here maybe for days. A folded flannel lay half buried under the tarp. I pulled it out and froze. It was Lana's. I recognized the faded pattern instantly, blue and gray, cuffs frayed, one button missing. Merritt took it gently from me, slipped it into an evidence bag. "We'll run DNA," he said. "But I think you already know." I nodded, unable to speak. Back at the cabin, the tech team was arriving. Merritt started directing them photos, soil samples, prints. I stayed outside by the Jeep, staring at the tree line. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called, sharp and lonely. The hum in my head hadn't faded. I pressed my palms against the hood of the car, grounding myself again, focusing on the heat of the metal. I could still see that stain under the cot, still smell the bleach, still hear her voice in my head saying, "Please don't come after him." When Merritt came back out, he handed me a small plastic bag. Inside was a torn piece of notebook paper, found wedged behind the filing cabinet. It was Lana's handwriting again, only 3 words this time. "Trust the river. A." I turned it over in my hands, the meaning sinking in like water through soil. The creek had always been her escape as kids. Whenever things got bad at home, she'd run to the water, sit there until the world made sense again. "Trust the river," I repeated quietly. Merritt glanced at me. "You think it's a clue?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's her way of telling me where to look next." He gave me a long look but didn't argue. "If she left that for you, we'll find what she wanted us to see." "No." He went back to the techs, talking logistics, calling for another sweep. I stayed by the car, clutching that piece of paper like it was the only thing keeping her alive. The forest around us shifted with the wind, branches creaking like old bones. And somewhere beyond the trees, I could swear I heard running water steady, unbroken, and still moving forward, no matter what tried to stop it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flannel shirt, the stain on the floor, and that note, "Trust the river." The words looped in my head like a mission order I hadn't been able to complete. I sat at the kitchen table, maps spread out, tracing the creek that wound north past Mill Creek into the state forest. The old railway cut through there, along with a few cabins used by hunters or off-grid loners. If she was alive and hiding, that's where she'd go. By sunrise, I was already on the road. I didn't tell Merritt. He'd try to stop me, quote, "protocol, call backup." But this wasn't about procedure anymore. This was personal, and I'd lived too long following orders that only got people buried. The forest was thick this time of year, green and gold and endless. The dirt trail narrowed until it barely looked like a road. I parked and continued on foot, boots crunching through fallen branches. The sound of the river grew louder with every step, steady and cold. Half a mile in, I found something an old campsite. Half collapsed, fire pit cold but recent. A few empty food cans, a torn tarp, and muddy footprints leading down toward the riverbank. I crouched and studied them. 2 sets again, one smaller, one heavier. And then, faintly, I heard something metallic click behind me, hands where I can see them. The voice was male, deep, calm. I turned slowly, my palms raised. It was Collins. He looked rougher than before, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, jacket streaked with dirt. He wasn't supposed to be out of jail, but there he was, standing 10 feet away with a revolver pointed at my chest. "You've got a hell of a habit of showing up where you shouldn't," he said. "You're supposed to be in custody," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He grinned. "Money buys fast lawyers. And friends. Merritt's a good cop, but even he can't keep a lock closed when the key belongs to someone else." End of tree. I took a step forward. "You killed her, didn't you?" He tilted his head, pretending to think. "Killed? No. She was alive the last time I saw her. Scared, sure. Crying, begging me to make it stop. But breathing." My jaw tightened. "Where is she now?" He shrugged. "You really want to know? Or do you want someone to blame? Because those aren't the same thing." I moved closer, slow and deliberate. "You don't get to talk like you're the victim here." His smirk vanished. "You think I wanted this? Your sister poked around where she didn't belong. She was smart, too. Smart for her own good. She thought she could expose people who've been in this game for decades. She was trying to protect her son. Yeah, he said. And now look where that got her. That was it. Something in me broke. Before I knew it, I was on him. The gun went off once, the bullet tearing through a tree behind me. I tackled him hard, the weapon skidding across the dirt. We hit the ground in a tangle of limbs and adrenaline. He swung first, wild, angry. I blocked, countered, drove my knee into his ribs. He gasped, tried to grab for the gun again, but I kicked it out of reach. He spat blood and glared up at me. Go ahead, soldier. Do what you came to do. That's what you people are good at, right? Cleaning up messes. For a second, I almost did. My hand hovered near the gun, my pulse thundering. He wanted me to cross that line to become the same kind of monster he was. But the training that had built me, the discipline that had kept me alive through years of combat, pulled me back. I grabbed his wrist, twisted hard until he cried out, and yanked his hands behind his back with a zip tie from my pocket. You don't get to decide how this ends, I said quietly. When Merritt arrived, because yes, I'd finally called him, he didn't even look surprised. He just stared at Collins, cuffed and bruised, and then at me. Couldn't wait, huh? Didn't trust waiting, I said. He sighed. Fair enough. We drove Collins back to the station, silence heavy in the car. Merritt's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, he muttered, He's not the type to act alone. If he's talking about people in this game, that means a network. And that means your sister got caught in something bigger than this town. She mentioned offshore accounts, I said. Maybe she found proof of who those people are. Maybe, Merritt said. But she also mentioned the river. Trust the river. She was leaving us a trail, I said. He nodded slowly. If that's true, she might have hidden something out there, evidence, maybe a drive, something she couldn't keep in the house. We locked Collins in holding again, under tighter supervision this time. He didn't say a word during booking, just stared at me with that same unnerving calm. As Merritt filled out paperwork, I stood outside the room, watching through the glass. Collins looked up and smiled, just slightly. You think this ends with me? He said through the intercom. You really don't know what you're walking into. I know exactly what I'm walking into, I said. You're just the first stop. He laughed, low and mean. You sound just like her. I won. The words hit harder than they should have. I left before I could give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Outside, the afternoon light was fading into orange again, dust hanging in the air. I leaned against the hood of my Jeep, letting the silence settle. For the first time since this began, my hands were steady. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was purpose. Merritt joined me a few minutes later. We found something in Collins's truck. A second burner phone, different number. There's one text from an unknown contact, time-stamped the night Lana disappeared. He showed me the message on his phone. Unknown. Package handled. Riversite cleaned. No trace. Collins. Good. She had the drive. Make sure it's gone. I stared at the screen. They used the word package. You think that means her? Merritt frowned. Could mean the evidence. Could mean both. The pit in my stomach deepened. If they said cleaned, that means they went back. Maybe that's why we didn't find anything. He nodded. Maybe. But there's still one thing left to check downstream from where we found her note. If she hid something by the river, that's where it would end up. The sound of the wind picked up again, brushing through the dry brush like static. I felt that same hum building under my ribs, not panic this time, but drive, the one that came before every deployment, every operation, every line you couldn't uncross once you stepped over it. Merritt saw it too. Don't do anything stupid, he said quietly. Depends on your definition, I said. He gave a half smile. I'm starting to think we don't share the same one. I got into the Jeep and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. The radio kicked on automatically, some old country song Lana used to play on long drives. I didn't bother turning it off. As the tires hit the dirt road again, I followed the river, watching it glint between the trees like a trail of moving silver. Trust the river. It sounded less like a clue now, and more like a dare. The kind my sister would have made, smiling just enough to drive me crazy, knowing I wouldn't be able to let it go. And she was right, I couldn't. The stretch of river curved through the valley like a vein, shallow enough to wade through but strong enough to carry anything downstream. I parked near an old bridge that hadn't been used in years and followed the sound of water until the forest swallowed the rest of the world. The sky was low and gray, the kind that made everything look like it was holding its breath. I followed the current for maybe a mile before I saw it half buried under a fallen log, a plastic container cracked and filled with mud. I knelt, brushed away the dirt, and pried it open. Inside were two things: a waterproof USB drive and a single Polaroid photograph. The photo was of Lana. She was standing in front of her house, holding Connor, smiling that nervous smile she always had when something was wrong but she didn't want to admit it. On the back, she'd written, "If I don't make it back, this is my truth." My stomach twisted. The flash drive was cold in my palm, heavier than it should have been. I didn't even wait to get back to town. I plugged it into my laptop right there on the hood of the Jeep, the river humming beside me. The drive opened into a single folder: evidence. Inside were videos, audio recordings, scanned contracts, and a series of emails all connecting Collins and his so-called home improvement business to a front company registered under W. Palmer. The money trail stretched farther than I expected: shell corporations, fake property sales, and overseas accounts. It wasn't just Collins. It was half the town. One video file was labeled Meeting 3. I clicked it. The footage was grainy, shot from a hidden camera. Lana's voice came first, low and tense. "I'm done with this, Reed. I can't keep lying to my clients." Collins's voice replied, casual and cold. "You don't get to be done. You're in this now. You sign off the books, or that little boy of yours has an accident." She gasped. "You wouldn't." "I would," he said. "And if you go to the cops, I'll make sure you're the one they find guilty. You've got enough signatures on those papers to bury yourself." The sound of something breaking a chair maybe filled the audio, followed by her shouting. Then the video cut off. I stared at the screen, every muscle in my body tight. It wasn't just a threat, it was proof of intent. Proof that she hadn't been reckless or naive, she'd been trapped. And she'd fought back the only way she could: by collecting evidence. I called Merritt and told him what I found. His tone went from tired to focused in a heartbeat. "Don't move," he said. "I'm sending a unit." By the time he arrived, rain had started to fall, soft at first, then heavy. We watched the river together as the tech team copied the files. Merritt's jaw was tight. "This isn't just local crime. These transfers go through 3 states. Someone higher up gave the orders." "How?" "Then Collins wasn't lying when he said he wasn't the only one," I said. He nodded. "We can get him to talk. With this, he doesn't have a way out." We drove straight to the station. Collins was waiting in the interrogation room again, but the smirk was gone. When Merritt dropped the flash drive on the table, he didn't even reach for it. He just leaned back, studying us both. "So you found it," he said finally. "You recorded yourself threatening a woman and her child," Merritt said. "That's not just stupidity, that's a confession." Collins's lips twitched like he wanted to laugh. "You think I care about prison? You don't get it. The people who run this, they don't leave witnesses. I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting everyone else from them." "By killing her?" I snapped. He shook his head. "I didn't kill her." Merritt crossed his arms. "Then where is she?" Collins looked at me. "You really want to know?" I met his eyes. "Say it." "1. She's dead," he said, voice flat. "But it wasn't me. She tried to run with the evidence. They found out. I buried her because I didn't want them to leave her out there like trash." For a moment, everything inside me went silent. The air left my lungs, my brain slowed down, and the world blurred around the edges. "Where?" I finally managed. "He didn't fight. Old drainage site, north side of the freight yard. You'll find what's left." Merritt signaled the officers outside. Collins didn't resist when they took him away. He just looked back at me once, eyes hollow. "You can't win against ghosts, Lieutenant. They're already part of the system." I followed Merritt out of the room, every step heavier than the last. We didn't speak on the way to the site. The rain had turned to a steady downpour, soaking the dirt roads, turning everything to gray. When we reached the old freight yard, the smell hit first damp earth, rust, decay. The site was fenced off, a wide ditch running behind the old loading docks. The forensics team moved quietly, careful, professional. It didn't take long. They found her wrapped in a tarp under 2 feet of soil near the drainage pipe. The flannel shirt was still around her shoulders. Merritt stood beside me while they worked, saying nothing. He didn't have to. I stared at the spot, numb. The rain blurred everything, or maybe that was just my eyes. I wanted to scream, to tear something apart, but the noise wouldn't come. I'd seen bodies before, soldiers, civilians, people caught between decisions that went wrong, but this was different. This was family. When they lifted her out, I noticed something on her wrist. A silver bracelet, the one I'd given her years ago when she graduated college. It had a single engraving on the inside. To find your way home. The words barely cut through the sound of the rain. Back at the station, Merritt took my statement, but it was more formality than necessity. Everyone knew what had happened. The district attorney filed for an immediate murder charge. The media would find out eventually, but I didn't care. I sat in the observation room, staring at the evidence board covered with photographs and timelines. Merritt came in, coffee in hand. Autopsy will confirm it, but we've got everything we need. Collins won't walk out again. End of fording. Doesn't change anything, I said quietly. No, he admitted. But it means she gets justice. I gave a dry laugh. Justice? That's a word people like to use when they can't undo something. He didn't argue. He just sat down across from me. You know, I've been doing this 20 years. Most families never get answers. You did. That matters. I looked up at him. She died scared and alone, Merritt. Answers don't fix that. He took a sip of coffee and set the cup down. No, but they stopped the same people from doing it again. And that's something. The room went quiet again. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang, muffled by distance. The sound barely registered. When I finally stood, I looked at the board one last time. Collins's photo was pinned dead center, his mugshot glaring back. Around it were all the threads, money, documents, names. It was supposed to feel like closure, but it didn't. It felt like staring at a wound that had stopped bleeding but hadn't healed. I left the building just as the clouds started to break, a thin line of sunlight cutting through the gray. The air smelled like wet asphalt and burnt coffee. Connor was waiting at the hospital, staying with a social worker until custody cleared. When I walked in, he looked up, his eyes searching my face for something. I knelt down beside him. Did you find Mom? He asked. I nodded once. Yeah, kiddo. I did. He stared at me for a long time, then whispered. Is she coming back? I wanted to lie, but he deserved better. No, but she's safe now. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than a child should. Then he leaned into me, small arms wrapping around my neck, and I finally let myself cry quietly, into his shoulder, where he couldn't see my face. The world outside kept moving, phones ringing, doors opening, officers walking by, but for once none of it mattered. All I could hear was the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, small but strong, like the river still moving somewhere out there. And for the first time since it all started, I didn't feel the need to fight it. The courtroom smelled like old wood and tension. The air conditioning hummed, trying but failing to cool the room packed with reporters, locals, and people who just wanted to witness someone else's tragedy. Collins sat at the defense table in a press suit that didn't fool anyone. His hair was cut, his face shaved, but the arrogance was still there, that quiet smirk that said he believed he'd still win. I sat behind the prosecutor's table, next to Merritt. I wasn't supposed to be there officially, but the DA wanted me close, in case the jury needed to see the family's face, the one left standing. Connor was with social services, too young to understand what this room meant, and too fragile to hear what they were about to say about his mother. The judge entered, the bailiff called for order, and just like that, months of investigation collapsed into this single moment. I'd been to war zones quieter than that courtroom. The prosecutor started strong. The evidence was airtight, the video files, the money trail, the hidden recordings Lana made, and the confession Collins had given in custody. But defense lawyers are a special breed of magician. They can twist reality until guilt looks like self-preservation. Mr. Collins, his attorney said, pacing slowly before the jury, was a victim of a larger machine. He was under threat himself. He cooperated with the state, revealed key details about an organized network still under investigation, and most importantly, he did not kill Lana Mercer. He buried her, yes, but out of fear, not malice. The jury shifted uncomfortably. Fear. The word hung in the air like it was supposed to excuse everything. Merritt leaned toward me and whispered, "They're playing the sympathy card. They'll lose it," I muttered. Fear doesn't justify a shallow grave. When it was the prosecution's turn again, they showed the footage from the drive. The courtroom went silent as Lana's voice filled the room, her pleading, his threats, the sound of her crying out before the feed cut off. The jurors looked sick, some turning away. The prosecutor pointed at Collins. "That is not fear, that is control. That is a man who saw a woman trying to escape and made sure she didn't." For once, Collins looked small. His lawyer objected twice, was overruled both times, and by the end of the afternoon you could feel the shift. The room wasn't on his side anymore. But justice in real life isn't like the movies. There's no dramatic music, no applause when the truth finally lands. There's just the endless grind of procedure. The defense called their last witness a woman from the finance firm connected to the shell companies. She claimed Collins was just a middleman, that the real operations were run by unseen investors overseas. She produced documents showing transactions that didn't include his name, suggesting he was more pawn than player. It was technically true, but everyone in that room knew truth and justice rarely aligned perfectly. The trial lasted 6 days. 6 days of reliving everything, every photo, every sound, every recorded word of my sister's fear. By the time closing arguments came, I felt hollowed out. The prosecutor stood, her voice calm but steady. "You'll hear the defense say Reed Collins didn't mean for this to happen. But every criminal starts with an excuse. Every coward hides behind someone worse. What matters is choice. He made his. Now it's time for you to make yours." The jury left. The room emptied into that strange in-between quiet where no one breathes normally. I didn't move. Merritt sat beside me, eyes fixed on the empty judge's bench. 2 hours later, they came back. The foreman stood, voice low and certain. "On the charge of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant guilty." I exhaled for the first time in days. The room erupted, some gasps, some sighs of relief, a single muffled sob from somewhere behind me. Collins didn't move. His eyes flicked toward me once, and in that half second, I saw what looked like disappointment, not regret, not fear, but the realization that his luck had finally run out. The judge handed down the sentence: life without parole. Collins would die in a concrete box, and the system he'd served would eventually forget his name. When the gavel came down, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like the closing of a door that should have been shut years ago. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted my name, asking how I felt. I didn't answer. I just kept walking until the noise faded behind me. Merritt caught up at the bottom of the steps. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," I said. "She did. She left the evidence. I just followed it." He gave a faint smile. "You could have taken his head off that day by the river. You didn't. That counts for something." "Maybe," I said, "but it doesn't feel like it." Then, he hesitated, then added, "You're not done, you know. People like Collins don't operate alone. The feds are going to keep digging." I nodded. "Then let them dig. I'm done with graves." I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove to the cemetery on the edge of town. The grass was still damp from last night's rain. Her grave was simple, just her name, the dates, and a short line I'd chosen. She fought for truth, even when it cost her everything. I stood there for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for words. At some point, I realized Merritt had followed me again, though he stayed a few paces back. "The DA's office wants to issue a statement," he said. "Public closure, that kind of thing." "Closure's overrated," I said. "It's just what people say when they want you to stop talking about the dead." He looked at the grave and nodded slowly. "Maybe. But sometimes it's all we get." And I stared at the headstone until my eyes blurred. She wanted to protect her kid. That's all. Everything else was noise. Merritt shoved his hands in his pockets. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were dangerous." I gave a dry laugh. "You weren't wrong." "No," he said, smiling faintly, "but not in the way I thought." The wind shifted, carrying the sound of the nearby river, the same one she trusted to hide her truth. It sounded softer now, less like a warning and more like an echo of something she'd left behind. I reached down, touched the cold stone. You got him, Lana. It's over. Merritt stayed silent beside me. After a while, he said, There's talk of commendations. The department's recommending you for civilian assistance. I shook my head. I don't need a medal. Just a little quiet. Had chuckled. Can't promise quiet, but maybe peace. Same difference, I said. We left as the sun began to dip, the sky streaked with orange and gray. Merritt headed back to his car, but I lingered by the gate. For a brief second, I thought I saw movement near the trees, a kid, maybe, holding something small and silver that caught the light before disappearing again. Probably just my eyes playing tricks, but it made me smile anyway. On the drive home, I rolled the windows down and let the cool air hit my face. The courthouse, the graveyard, the flashing cameras, they all faded behind me. What stayed was the sound of the river, steady and unbroken, the same rhythm my sister must have heard before everything went dark. Justice had come, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. And sometimes, that's enough. A month after the trial, my apartment finally felt like a place someone could live in again. The curtains were open, the air smelled faintly of coffee instead of stale silence, and the ticking of the kitchen clock didn't sound like a countdown anymore. Connor was asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket he'd claimed as his own. He was getting used to Las Vegas, the noise, the lights, the fact that night never really arrived here, only a dim version of day. I sat by the window, watching headlights crawl down the strip. For the first time in years, I wasn't counting down to deployment or waiting for a call from command. I'd filed my leave papers 3 weeks ago, indefinite. After 20 years of service, I needed a different kind of fight, one that didn't involve weapons or orders. The military had taught me how to survive chaos. It hadn't taught me what to do after. Connor stirred, mumbling in his sleep. He'd stopped having nightmares every night, but some still got through. When they did, he called for his mom before remembering she wasn't there. Those moments hurt more than anything the war ever threw at me. There's no training for explaining death to a child who still believes love can undo it. During the day, we built small routines. I'd walk him to school, pick him up in the afternoon, take him for ice cream or to the park. He'd started to laugh again, short, cautious bursts at first, then fuller ones that made strangers smile. The kid was resilient. He had his mother's stubborn streak. Merritt checked in occasionally, usually late in the day, when paperwork kept him at the precinct. He'd bring updates on the wider investigation, the network, as he called it. Apparently, the feds had taken over, and several arrests were pending. Collins had tried to cut another deal, but no one was listening this time. He was done talking. You ever think about testifying in the federal case? Merritt asked one evening over the phone. I've given them everything I had, I said. The rest isn't my war. He chuckled softly. You always say that, but you don't really believe it. Maybe not, I admitted. But for now, I'm trying to. When I hung up, I noticed Connor standing in the hallway, holding a drawing. It was a stick figure family. Me, him, and a woman with long brown hair. That's Mom, he said, pointing. She's watching us from the sky. I swallowed the lump in my throat and smiled. She'd like that. Or attend. He looked at the picture again. Do you think she'd be proud of me? She already is, I said, and she's probably yelling at me for letting you eat ice cream for dinner again. That made him laugh, a real one this time. It filled the room like sunlight. Later that week, I started therapy again. The VA had a good program, and the doctor was the kind who didn't talk in metaphors or soft tones. He just listened. I told him about the war, about Lana, about the cabin, and about Collins. I told him I'd spent half my life learning how to fight, and the other half pretending that fighting made sense. He nodded and said, You know, soldiers and survivors have the same problem. We both get used to surviving more than living. That stuck with me. At night, I still had moments, flashes of sound, of her voice saying, Trust the river. Sometimes I'd wake up and hear running water even when the pipes weren't on. But it wasn't haunting anymore. It was grounding. Like she was reminding me that life doesn't stop moving, even when you want it to. One afternoon, I took Connor to a veterans event downtown. There were booths, flags, speeches, the kind of thing I usually avoided. But he wanted to see the parade, and honestly, so did I. As the color guard passed, Connor saluted, his tiny hand pressed to his forehead with absolute seriousness. The crowd around us clapped, and I couldn't help laughing. A man next to me, another veteran, leaned over. "He yours?" "Yeah," I said. "My sister's boy." He nodded knowingly. "You raising him?" "Trying to. That's more service than most of us ever do," he said, patting my shoulder. For once, I didn't argue. When we got home, Connor ran to his room, clutching one of the small flags they'd handed out. He planted it on his nightstand, next to the old teddy bear he refused to part with. I watched him from the doorway, the kid who'd survived more than he should have, and I realized something simple. Revenge had never been the real story. Survival was, healing was, and Lana, even in death, had led us both here. That night, I dug through the old box of her things. The police had returned them after the trial, a few photos, a locket, her wedding ring, the compass charm I'd found near the cabin. I turned the charm over in my palm, the edges smooth from years of wear. It wasn't broken after all, just bent slightly. Somehow, that felt fitting. There was also her old journal, the one she used to write grocery lists and notes to herself. Near the back, a few pages were torn, but one remained a note in her handwriting. Faint, but legible. "If anything happens to me, tell Connor to live bravely. Tell him his mom wasn't perfect, but she tried. And tell my sister to stop carrying everyone else's battles. She's earned her peace." I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, reading it over and over, letting the words dig in until they found a place to rest. In the morning, I took Connor hiking outside the city, away from the casinos, away from the noise. We found a small stream cutting through the desert rock. He skipped stones while I stood by the water, watching the sunlight bounce off the surface. He looked up at me and said, "This looks like the river you talked about." "It's not the same one," I said, smiling, "but it moves the same way." "And her for." He threw another stone, missed, and laughed. "Mom would like it here." "She would," I said softly. For the first time, the ache in my chest didn't feel like grief. It felt like gratitude, the kind that sneaks up quietly when the fight's finally over. On the drive back, Connor fell asleep in the passenger seat, head tilted, mouth slightly open. The radio played an old song Lana used to sing along to when we were kids. I joined in, quietly at first, then louder, until the lyrics turned into something like a promise I hadn't known I was making. When we got home, the evening light spilled across the living room, golden and steady. I set the compass charm on the table next to the photo of Lana and Connor, both of them smiling like the world hadn't gotten around to breaking them yet. The city outside buzzed with life, the constant hum of people chasing something, anything. I didn't need to chase anymore. For the first time in years, I felt still. The year slipped by faster than I expected. The desert heat gave way to wind and sandstorms, then back to sun again. The world didn't pause just because we did. But somewhere in the noise, life started to sound normal again, or at least something close to it. Connor had grown taller, his voice a little deeper, his laugh louder. He played soccer after school, made friends, and brought home messy art projects that somehow always involved glitter. I'd learned to live with glitter. You stop fighting it when you realize it's just part of the new chaos you're lucky to have. I still woke early, though that military clock in my brain refusing to sleep past dawn. Mornings became mine again. I'd make coffee, stand on the balcony, and watch the sun climb over the city skyline. It was strange how Las Vegas looked different now. It wasn't temptation and neon anymore. It was just home. A place where Connor could grow up without the weight of secrets. Every so often, Merritt still called. He'd give me updates on the lingering threads, a few arrests here, a court case there. Collins was serving life, and the rest of the ring had either flipped on each other or disappeared. But Merritt didn't sound satisfied. "You ever notice," he'd said once, "Justice always shows up late to the party?" "Better late than never," I told him. "Yeah," he said, "but it never brings what you asked for." He was right. Justice doesn't fill the holes it leaves behind. It just gives you the tools to build around them. On the anniversary of Lana's death, Connor and I drove back to Reno. The old grocery store was long gone, boarded up and faded under years of dust and neglect. We parked out front anyway. The windows were cracked, the sign barely hanging. I stood there for a minute, tracing the memories that still clung to the place: her laughter, Dad's quiet humming, Mom's cinnamon rolls cooling by the register. It all felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Connor tugged my sleeve. Can we go see her? Yeah, I said. Let's go. The cemetery was quiet. No cameras this time. No reporters, no detectives. Just us. The grass was trimmed, the flowers from last week still fresh. I knelt and placed a small bundle of lilies on the headstone. Connor added a drawing another one of his stick figure families. This time, there were 3 of us holding hands. She'd like that, I said. He nodded. I miss her. I know. She was brave, right? He asked, eyes fixed on the stone. The bravest person I ever knew, I said. She didn't back down, even when she was scared. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, Do you think I'll be like her? I smiled. You already are. You just don't know it yet. We stayed there until the sun dipped low, painting everything gold. Before leaving, I slipped the compass charm, the one I'd found by the river under the flowers. It had belonged to her. Now it belonged there. Back in Vegas, things settled into rhythm again. School, work, dinner, laughter. Life didn't erase the pain, but it made space for it, gave it context. Sometimes, that's all healing really is. One Friday night, after Connor went to bed, I sat on the couch flipping through his school binder. Tucked between homework sheets was an essay titled, The Person I Look Up To. The first line read, My aunt says revenge doesn't make you strong. It just makes you tired. She says real strength is protecting people, not hurting them. I read it twice before closing the folder, leaning back and letting the quiet fill the room. It wasn't pride I felt, not exactly. It was something softer. Relief, maybe? Proof that the cycle had stopped here. That the boy who'd once hidden in a closet had found his voice. A few weeks later, Merritt came by the apartment. He'd been promoted, which he downplayed in typical Merritt fashion. More paperwork, fewer car chases, he said, grinning. We sat on the balcony drinking beer, watching the city pulse below us. You ever think about going back? He asked. To the army? He nodded. Every day, I said. And every day I remind myself I already did my time. I'm needed here now. He smiled. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. We talked for a while about nothing: sports, food, the Vegas traffic. Then he looked out at the skyline and said, You know, you could have taken revenge. No one would have blamed you. But you didn't. Why? I took a sip before answering. Because revenge doesn't fix anything. It just keeps you in the same place, waiting for the next hit. My sister deserved better than that. Connor deserved better than that. He nodded slowly. You really believe that? I have to, I said. Otherwise, what was all of this for? We sat there until the city lights blurred into one endless glow. When he left, the apartment felt still again, but not empty, just peaceful. Later that night, I found Connor awake, sitting by the window. Can't sleep? I asked. He shook his head. I was thinking about Mom. I sat beside him. The city hummed outside, steady and distant. She used to tell me, he said softly, that rivers don't stop. Even when they hit rocks, they just find a way around. You think that's true? It is, I said, and you're part of that river now, so am I. He leaned against me, eyes heavy. I'm glad you came to find me that day. I smiled. Yeah, me too. We sat like that for a while, no words, no noise, just the quiet rhythm of breathing and the soft flicker of the streetlights reflecting off the window. When he finally fell asleep, I carried him to bed, tucked the blanket under his chin, and stood there for a long moment. He was safe. He was home. That was enough. I turned off the light, walked back to the balcony, and looked out over the city one last time before midnight. Somewhere out there, the river kept flowing, maybe slower, maybe softer, but always forward. And in that stillness, I realized revenge had never been the real story. It was about love, flawed, painful, relentless love. The kind that survives even after everything else falls apart. I promised Lana once I'd protect what mattered most. I finally understood what that meant. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about continuation. About turning pain into purpose and keeping the promise to move forward no matter how deep the current ran. The night was quiet, the city alive, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a soldier anymore. I felt like a sister who had finally come home.